Holy smokes everyone. In this video, I'm going to be going over exactly how the US government and banks, commercial banks and central banks are looting the population in the US and how they're stealing up to 75% of your wealth. Most people think this topic is too complicated or too boring, so they don't even watch it. And this is why they don't teach this in schools. They don't want you to know this information that I'm just about to share, and they don't want you to learn from history and learn exactly how this theft started. This information is some of the most important that you'll ever get, because people, if we don't stop their reckless spending and their reckless taxation now, they won't stop until they completely squeeze every penny out of you so you just have enough to buy the bare essentials. And they'll also make it impossible for people to build wealth and get ahead. Okay everyone, let's get right into it. So looky here everyone, money is cheap, let's spend it. White House has announced, I'm sure you all have heard of this, but we'll get a bit deeper into this, a $6 trillion budget. That's right, we're now talking in close to the tens of trillions. Just 10 years ago, if you talked about the government will be spending $6 trillion in a year, they would have thought you crazy. And what's going to happen in the next 10 years? Are we going to be talking in the tens of trillions or hundreds of trillions? Listen to this. The White House on Friday sent Congress a $6 trillion budget plan that would ramp up spending on infrastructure, education, and combating climate change, arguing it makes a good fiscal sense to invest now when the cost of borrowing is cheap and reduce deficits later. So a couple of things they say here. They say borrowing is cheap, but as we've all seen, the yields on the US Treasuries have been going up. And if the Fed does have to lift interest rates, then that means their interest bill is going to get a lot more expensive. The thing they always say, they'll reduce deficits later. They always say, look, not my problem. The next president can deal with that. All I care about right now is getting my votes and spending as much money as I can in this 4 years to boost the economy as much as I can to make me look good. And you know what? I think this is why the West is going down, and countries like India and China, they look much further in the future than 4 years, and they invest for the long term, not just for the next 4 years. And listen to this everyone, this is a 36.6% increase from 2019. So they're almost increasing their spending by 50%. And what you have to know is, it's like a person that's got a bad spending habit. They earn, for example, $100,000, they're earning good money, but they spend all their money and then they take on credit card debt and more debt and they buy houses they can't afford. So then they go, okay, I'll go out and earn more money. And then they earn $200,000. But what do? They increase their spending even more and they take on even more debt. And they go, okay, I just need to earn more money. And then they start making $500,000. But again, they lift their living expenses with their revenue. And that's the exact same thing the government's doing right now. They could tax you 100%, take every penny from you, but if they spend more than they take in and take on more debt, it doesn't matter how much they tax you, they're still going to be in a deficit. And McConnell said in a tweet, President Biden's proposal will drown American families in debt, deficits, and inflation. And we're already having enough problems with inflation, and Biden just wants to throw even more fuel on the fire with another $6 trillion in spending. But of course they say, look, that's not our problem, that's up to the Fed to deal with. And the Fed doesn't seem to want to deal with it. It's just everyone's passing the buck here. Now, something you need to know is, people seem to think that, taxes, they've always been around, they've been around forever, they've always existed, and, it's something like death and taxes, you just have to pay it. But income tax, it wasn't actually created until 1861, when one of the greatest presidents in history announced he would create a income tax of 3% to help pay for the Civil War. But he told the people after they've paid back the debt, they'll get rid of income taxes. And we can see that here. So there was a 3% income tax for incomes over $800, which was a lot of money then. But after 10 years, he got rid of the income taxes. But then that brings us to the year of 1913. Also the same year the Federal Reserve was created. So this was a very bad year for the US people, because two things were created: the Federal Reserve to completely destroy the currency and to destroy people's purchasing power and create financial instability, and also the Revenue Act of 1913 was created. But listen to this everyone, the income tax rate for people earning $20,000 in 1913 was only 2%. Now, you want to know something even more crazy? This was $20,000 in 1913. Do you know what that is in today's dollars? For adjusted with inflation since 1913, that would be the equivalent of someone earning $539,000 today. So people earning between 0 and $539,000 would only pay 1 or 2% tax. But what are the people paying now? Well, as we can see here, people are paying anywhere from 10% to 35%. So it's kind of like an analogy. If you want to kill a frog, you don't put it in a boiling pot of hot water because it'll jump out straight away. But if you put that frog in a cold pot of water and you just slowly turn up the heat, saying, don't worry, we're just making it a bit warm for you. For example, don't worry, we're only going to increase taxes 1, 2%, just a little bit. Don't worry. Well, before you know it, the frog's dead, and before you know it, you're paying these crazy tax rates that we're paying today of anywhere between 10 if you're earning less than $10,000 to 35%. Now, of course, after 1930, say, look, guys, we'll just have 2-3%, and it only affected about 3% of the population. Well, then, bam, around 1916, they increased the tax rate to roughly around 75%. So what all this new spending means is there's going to be more tax hikes. And as we can see with this chart here is what they always do is they always create a tax and say, look, guys, we're here to tax the rich. The rich aren't paying enough. And hey, I'm not coming from any bias here because I'm not rich and I'm not in America, so I'm coming from a completely unbiased position here. But just from me studying history to see what they actually do is they'll go, we're going to tax the rich and give the money to the little guy. But as we can see here, the tax rates for the poor have actually gone up much faster and much higher than the tax rates for the rich. And look here, everyone, White House defends $1 trillion stimulus while Jamie Dimon and Larry Summers warns of runaway inflation. So again, we've got the income tax, that's theft against the people. But a hidden tax most people don't know about is inflation. Because say for example, you're in a current tax bracket, but if inflation, people say earning $50,000 today, well, if we have inflation, just for example, of 10% over the next 10 years, well, then everyone will be earning, roughly, 100, 120,000. So then that means people get pushed up into a higher tax bracket and then they pay more taxes and the cost of goods go up and people pay more tax on the cost of goods. And then what that higher inflation does is it devalues the debt. And that's what they really want to do. They can't pay it back. There's no way they can pay it back now. So what they need to do is lift inflation to increase their revenues and to devalue that debt. So listen to this, everyone. JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon said, the government stimulus could get carried away. If that money is wasted, it is not productively spent, we'll have more inflation, less productivity, slower growth, and the American democracy you have will lose even more credibility in the eyes of the world. And this now brings us back to the Fed, because inflation, when we look here at the PCE, this is the most important inflation indicator the Fed uses. This came in at 3.1%. So again, this is 50% over the Federal Reserve's inflation target. So this is what Summers said that the Fed is doing. The Fed's idea used to be that it removed the punch bowl before the party got good. Now, the Fed's doctrine is that we'll only remove the punch bowl after it sees some people staggering around drunk. We are printing money, we are creating government bonds, we are borrowing in unprecedented scales. Those are things that surely create more of a risk of a sharp dollar decline than we had before. And sharp dollar declines are much more likely to translate themselves into inflation than they were historically. And what has happened to the dollar? Let's have a look at the dollar index. You can see here, the dollar index has gone from around 100 on the 19th of April 2020 and has completely plummeted down to around 90. So it's lost 10% of its purchasing power in 1 year. So again, that's just another way they're stealing your wealth by currency manipulation. So we got taxes here on one end, which is, anywhere between up to 39.6%, which they want to create. I'll get into that later. Then you got state income taxes, where in California, if you're in the top bracket there, it's like 13.3%. Then, for example, you got real inflation with shadow stats. They've got CPI the way they used to record CPI in the 1990s, around 8%. Then you've got the dollar depurchasing its value around 10%. You're losing about 60 to 70% of your wealth from taxation, from inflation, and from devaluation of the dollar. But where's the outrage, everyone? The average American doesn't know this. So please share this with your family, share this with your friends so they can know exactly what's going on here. So again, going back to inflation, it says here, a key inflation indicator rose a faster than expected 3.1% in April as price pressures built in the rapidly expanding US economy, the Commerce Department reported Friday. And listen to this. There have been some indications recently that the Fed is at least willing to start talking about reducing the pace of asset purchases, but any real action is likely months away. Central bankers see the ongoing price pressure as temporary. And how long have they been saying that for? A year now. Due to supply chain bottlenecks and comparisons to last year when the economy was largely shut down. People, they keep saying inflation is temporary. They're telling you, suck it up. But people can't afford to suck it up. Their budgets are on the brink. They can't afford to pay an extra 10-20% for the grocery bills. They can't afford to pay more rent. They can't afford to pay, an extra 20-30% of gas prices. Look at the price of gas. It is going up out of control. And even, for example, say towards the end of the year, inflation slows down to 2% annualized. Well, it's too late. The damage has already been done. They've already completely hurt the consumer's purchasing power with already huge amounts of inflation. So even if it does slow down, the damage has already been done. So again, just going back to those shadow stats here, I forgot to bring it up earlier. As we can see here, 1990s based, the way they used to adjust the CPI, it is at 8%. And if we look here, you got Janet Yellen saying, those are rookie numbers. You call that a deficit? I'll show you a deficit. She's saying we're spending like it's 2010, and she wants even more spending. And people, what you have to know about Janet Yellen, she's an ex-Federal Reserve chair, she's an ex-banker, she works for the banks, and what we have in the government right now is a rotating door. We now have bankers going in and out of government, we have lobbyists lobbying the government to bring about all the ideas or all the agendas that they want. The governments are no longer in control. The big major corporations, they're the ones that are in control, and the lobbyists. The politicians, they're just puppets. It doesn't matter who you vote for. And it's funny because she actually blasted the Blast administration for spending too much, and now she wants to spend more than double that. And people, this will be huge for the markets. If this gets passed, I expect we're going to see a big sell-off in the stock market and the cryptocurrency market. So listen to this. Biden budget reiterates a 43.4% top capital gains tax for millionaires. Now you may think, oh look, this is just for the rich. Who cares about that? That's not going to affect me. Well, if you own stocks, it's going to hurt your stock portfolio. If you own real estate, it could hurt real estate. And if you own cryptocurrencies, it could hurt cryptocurrencies. Because think about it like this. The rich, they're the ones that have the majority of the money in the market. Now, say for example, normally if for example they make $1 million profit and before they paid 20% tax, well, they would have $800,000 left over to reinvest in the markets. But if you increase that to 43%, well, now they'll only have roughly $560,000 or $570,000 to reinvest back in the markets. So there'll be less money going back into the markets, and it could lead to a lost decade with higher interest rates and higher capital gains taxes. And of course, like all the other policies, they say, look, we're doing this to get at the rich. But they always just start at the rich, and then they bring that bracket down lower and lower until it affects more and more people. And also, this kills wealth building opportunities for those who are trying to invest and try to create wealth for the new generation. And of course, also he wants to increase the top marginal tax rate from 37% to 39.6%. But it's something you have to know what the rich can do and how the rich can just keep getting away with avoiding these taxes, and how this will just end up punishing the poor, and eventually they'll just end up lifting tax rates on the poor. And again, if inflation gets out of control, if we get hyperinflation, maybe everyone's going to be earning $500,000 a year. But what the rich can do, they've got lawyers, they've got resources to find ways to offset their taxes, to find ways to eliminate their tax bill. And also, if they're living off investments, for example, they're living off returns on their stock portfolio or cryptocurrency, Instead of paying tax, they can just borrow against their portfolio and only pay 3 or 4% interest instead of paying these capital tax rates. And you know what really grinds my gears and what shows this is just a complete scam, this whole financial system? Look how they can just create money out of thin air. The M2 money supply in 2020 went from 15 trillion to 20 trillion. So they can just create $5 trillion out of nothing like that. But then they turn around, they create money out of thin air, they create money that doesn't exist. Then they use your labor, your hours here on earth, your precious time that you can never get back. People, I'm about to get a bit deep here, but people literally give their whole lives. They give the most precious resource, their time, their labor, their skills, their intelligence, their intellect to the government, to these corporations in return for fake fiat currencies that isn't real money. And then the government takes that fake money and they use that to buy real hard assets, real goods, and use it for more human labor. So really, it's just like we're glorified slaves here with this current system. So why should people have to pay so much tax when the government can just issue $10 trillion in treasury and have the Federal Reserve come in and gobble it all up? Just some food for thought there. And not only these taxes, but he wants to increase the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%. So if that gets passed, that's going to hurt valuations for companies because then their price to earnings will get even worse. So people have to price in those higher taxes because their earnings are going to be hit. So again, that's bad news for the stock market as well. And then that means those companies, instead of investing in creating more jobs, all their money is going to go towards just paying higher taxes. And if that wasn't bad enough, what this is going to cause is going to cause a lot of rich people to leave the US. They're going to be like, I don't want to pay these crazy high taxes, and they know that the empire is falling. The US is slowly using its status of world superpower, and China may eventually take over. So the US is proposing, or they want, a 15% global tax rate so that corporations or the rich have nowhere to run or hide. So this is just getting closer and closer to what all these, conspiracy theorists talk about of one world government and one global organization like the WHO, like the IMF, the BIS, the World Economic Forum. The world is getting more and more globalized, which is a very big worry. And another question you have to ask yourself, everyone. Say, for example, everyone, I created a country. There was the poor and the uneducated. And so then I said, okay, I want to bring over some entrepreneurs. I want to bring over some smart people, some doctors, some lawyers, some business people, some scientists, the best and brightest. What do you think would happen to that country? It would flourish. And then that will create jobs for those poorer people. And we can create good schools to educate the poor people and so they can get better skills to get better jobs and become wealthier as well. And everyone will become wealthier. But then what happened if all of a sudden those rich people and educated people in the corporation said, you know what? I don't like this country anymore. I'm going to leave. Well, all those poor people, they won't have jobs anymore. And there'll be no tax revenue to tax the rich because all the rich are gone. So then the country will go down. But in the West, we seem to be so cocky that that can't happen to us. But that's exactly what will happen if they keep going down this path. So everyone, I hope this video opened your eyes to how much of your wealth the US government is really stealing. Like I said, it's all the way up to 70, 75% when you factor in the highest marginal tax rate, the highest marginal state tax rate, when you factor in the devaluation of the dollar and inflation. And then they can just create money out of nowhere and steal your labor and steal your hard-earned hours, and they can come in and buy up all the real hard assets in the world. We have to fight back against this higher taxation, this higher inflation, and this debasement of our hard-earned money. But everyone, what do you think? Let me know down below. Now, for all my loyal viewers and subscribers still watching, you're awesome. If you haven't already, please tap that like and subscribe button. I'll keep you up to date on the latest that's happening in the stock market, housing market, cryptocurrency market, and global finance news. If you're bored, I'll put up some other videos here. I'll see you there.